Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to Going Posta. Today we're going to be tackling Bicorno, which is a very fun one, and also, while it has a lot of really unique attributes to it, the things we'll do, the actual actions, are nothing new to you. Some of them will be a little bit new since we haven't gone over Frontale yet, and in fact when I was going over the guards with my guys, such as Jake, my resident Italian, joining me once again, I chose to go through Frontale, then loop back to Bicorno, since, as Fiore puts it, Posta Bicorno does everything that Finestra, Posta Longa, and Frontale do. So, once you know those three options, this is just another version of that. But, let's go over how Bicorno works. So first off, you can hold it in a couple different ways. Your left foot is going to be forward, though it doesn't actually matter, more so than the others, like really it doesn't matter, but Fiore likes to keep that left foot forward. You're going to invert your lead hand. Now, important thing is to keep the sword loose. You don't want to be curling your wrist. You want to have it just kind of here so it's nice and on that palm, a bit like a serving tray. Now that part's relatively simplistic, but when it comes to the backhand, we have a couple options. You can reverse your hand. So now I'm holding it with my thumbs pointing opposite directions, or if you're flexible enough, you can also just invert your grip entirely. I personally find this very comfortable, but I don't have a lot of rib cage to me. Other people may find it a bit more comfortable to reverse the backhand, and certainly depending upon what you're looking to do with your thrusts, this is very comfortable for me, and I can get sort of the equal amount of strength. Other people may want to reverse that hand to get a bit more strength, or alternatively for what you're doing. So they're both, I would say, fine options. Another thing I like about keeping the hands as they are and just turning the sword over is that I can move into and out of it quite quickly. Other people have told me they find reversing quicker. It's a personal preference thing. But what Bicorno is going to allow us to do is, like I said, all the same actions we've done out of Finestra and out of Longa and out of Frontale, which we'll tackle next week. So let's go through those briefly and talk about how they work. So firstly, let's talk about the aspects that it takes from Posta Longa. So I am of course left foot forward, and my sword is held with my elbows in, so even though it is extended, it is still quite strong. It's relatively hard to knock this aside, right? But the most likely thing that's going to happen is, of course, me launching a thrust from here. Now, I can launch a thrust straight out by just passing forward and striking. That's fine. I get about the same reach as I would if I were thrusting the other way. Nothing complicated here. However, since I am going ahead and reversing those hands, what this allows me to do is very easily apply pressure upward and to my left. This is a not dissimilar concept than wedging in like a wind in the German system. So, if, for example, Jake is in a position wherein he is in Posta Idona, obviously as I go to thrust at him, he's going to do one of two things. He's either going to try and break my point, or exchange my point, or he's going to try and attack me at that same time, neither of which are particularly good. Now the nice thing about launching a thrust out of Bicorno rather than Posta Longa is that if I extend my point out and he chooses to break my point, it will be shoved down, and I will then have to move into Finestra to defend myself, which leads into the rest of the breaking the point plays. However, if I thrust out of Bicorno instead, yes, my tip gets forced down, but I have my crossguard out there in a much more secure way. It doesn't mean that I'm necessarily safe, per se, but I've got a lot more of a fighting option than you would think. So that can be one aspect. If you know someone is particularly inclined to try and break the point, you may want to try Bicorno and see what you can get out of it. But, of course, like I said, we want to try and stifle that cut if he's going to cut at us. So what I'm going to do now, and this is especially good if you have one-hand reverse, is when I thrust, I'm also going to push my arms up to my upper left opening, so that'll look like this, with a pass forward, which will lead to I wedge in against his sword as I strike him. This is a very, very nice attack to launch, especially if you can catch someone in the process of they just came back to guard. So for example, let's say we're out here, right? We're playing Posta Longa. He pulls back, I go forward. Even if I didn't get him, the point is that I am super locked out here and in a very good position to, even if I didn't hit him initially, I have more than enough strength to get that tip on target without having to change my hand position. Even if he chooses to push my tip way to the side, I'm still set up for a nice fendenti, even though my hand was reversed. So that's one thing I like to do. This wedge in is a really fantastic thing to do. It's also a fantastic training tool, as eventually you'll figure out how to do it from Finestra, which is another reason that I like to do it like that. Now, that's one thing we can do. The other thing that we can do if we talk about Posta longa is if he tries to cut or knock at my tip, right? It's super light, very easy to move out of the way with just a small, later period would be cavazione or durchwechseln, but a little dip and I'm good. Now, when we did Posta longa, we often took that hand. You can still take the hand with Bicorno, especially if they're closer to you, but that cut is debatable. I would say it would suck, especially if I got him right on the back of the hand, but I don't think it's necessarily worth doing. If you're just playing for points and you're just making a point, he cuts, sure. He knows what happened, he shouldn't be swinging for my tip, and I executed an okay technique. But if we're talking life or death, that's wasted tempo. Instead, especially from a position so strong, if he's going to swing at my tip, bury it in him. Kill him nice and efficiently, and I guarantee that shot is going to drop him. Now, of course, you will have to worry a little bit about afterblow, but with the amount of force you're going to be giving on even a light thrust with this, you're probably not going to need to worry about afterblow. But, and I don't mean that in regards to it'll drop him instantly, I mean that in regards to you'll be too close to him to afterblow you. But, all that aside, if you're going to dip your tip, try to go for a thrust, and also I recommend you start aiming your thrusts in general lower and for the torso rather than out at the head, as that's going to give you a lot more strength. But, let's talk about its aspects that it gets from Finestra. Now, Finestra was great at both covering and striking, as well as I talked about earlier, we kind of got that wedge in if we let it go all the way up to left Finestra. We already discussed that. So let's talk about it in regards to covering and striking. Well, this is where things get a little bit more debatable. Obviously, it can launch a thrust without difficulty, but moving into this as a cover is kind of a new one, and possibly one that comes up during Fiore's second set of long-range plays, wherein I have cut out, but he remained, you're going to go ahead and be the master here. He remains left foot forward, and then he slides down to take my hands. It looks like he might be reinforcing by trying to go up into Posta Bicorno, which, if he's going for my hands, we'll rewind a little bit. If he's just trying to take my thumb or something, that does reinforce it. Now I'm overturning it because I'm bad at it. But, point being, that little turn by raising the strong, if he's going for my face, worthless. But if he's going for those hands in that moment, that guards that pretty well. It also might be an instance of me trying to reinforce my already extended position. So if I'm here and he doesn't take the initiative, then by reinforcing, I get a chance to shoot in his face, similar to a wind. That could be another instance in which it is being used, which, again, somewhat Finestra-ish. As for catching, just an outright cut, you can do that. I don't recommend it necessarily, but if you find yourself in a position where you can catch things a little bit more point forward, like here, wherein I caught kind of with the top edge and I sort of projected outward, now I'm in a great place to fire in that next thrust. It's tricky, but it's absolutely something you can do, and it kind of falls under the Finestra family in my opinion. Here's that one more time. I'm in some other position when he cuts for me. I reverse both hands and I catch with my edge, and then as I go to deliver my thrust, I just step forward and I almost get this sort of plunge over effect, which we normally don't see under Fiore's work, but I doubt he wouldn't be aware of it. So, that's all the stuff it gets from Finestra. What about Frontale? Frontale is not something we've covered yet, but to put it in a nutshell, it's going to be the idea of covering this linear plane. We've pretty much already gone over the idea. If I am out here and he tries to thrust at me or slide down at me or something, I now have reversed my hands and lifted my guard. Boom. I've just basically done Frontale, but my tip is more extended, which means it's easier for me to possibly get my point back in. As for doing it low, because Frontale can be done both high and low, a little dicier. Let's switch sides to this one. I'm not saying you couldn't do it, I'm saying that it's going to be tricky, right? So when we do the low and high Frontales, we'll go over next week, it's usually they've attacked high and then they're recovering low. So for example, we'll do the Bicorno, I catch, you can use that. Sure, I'm basically moving out of Bicorno into Frontale. Do I believe this is what Fiore means? I'm not sure. Is it doable? Yes. Would I rely on it personally? No. But it's on the table. You may find you're particularly good at it, and swords are supposed to be adaptable. But all in all, as far as specific motions for Bicorno, really the biggest thing that sets it aside from others is that it has the capability to worm its way in with the point in a way that hasn't been done before. All the times we've been doing thrust, be the exchange of points, breaking the point, or just launching thrust out initially, it's kind of been one-time action, or if they try to knock our blade aside, we've gone underneath for new opportunity. We haven't really worked against his blade a whole lot, but especially if you reverse your backhand, all of a sudden I get a lot more leverage. So if he's trying to play with me, I can work over that without difficulty, and then I can choose to go underneath. Same sort of idea. It's quite easy for me to kind of bully him around, especially if you choose to go to this upper quadrant, wherein once I get here, up and over, oh yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for me to get that point over there. So that might be something worth considering. Not to mention, you can always choose to reverse both hands, which is something we do see done, not necessarily in Fiore's book, but in other systems of the same time. But overall, that's going to be kind of what Bicorno does. Would I call it a jack of all trades, master of none? No. I would just say it's kind of in between positions, but unique enough of an entity that it deserves its own name and its own considerations. But otherwise, thank you very much, Jake. And that's Posta di Bicorno, the two-horned guard. So next week, we're going to be moving into Frontale, which I have now sufficiently teased you all with. It's not going to be a terribly complicated guard, but a very interesting one. And then from there, we'll just have one more form of Dente de Chingaro to do, and then that'll be it. So, thank you very much for watching, and we'll go over some other techniques another time.